Welcome to episode number 21 of the Road to Cinema podcast, featuring Oscar-nominated cinematographer Robert Yeoman of the new Wes Anderson film The Grand Budapest Hotel. Robert Yeoman has photographed every one of Wes Anderson's films going back to his debut feature film Bottle Rocket. We'll discuss Robert Yeoman's collaboration process with director Wes Anderson, as well as his general craft as a cinematographer. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, to read the Road to Cinema blog, and to watch our Road to Cinema YouTube series, please visit jogroadproductions.com. And you can follow us on Twitter for the latest updates at jogroad. And now we join Oscar-nominated cinematographer Robert Yeoman as he discusses the distinct visual style of director Wes Anderson throughout all of his films.
Well, he's always kind of been interested in symmetry. That's always been kind of a fairly constant throughout our work together. And, so when we come to a room, we always find the exact center and try to center up on doorways and windows and, framing actors, put the crosshairs right between your eyes. So that's been a pretty constant element. Generally been attracted to wider lenses, up close. So when we shoot our actors, we frequently are a very wide lens, very close, which has been pretty constant. And over the years, he always liked a lot of depth of field. He likes things to be in focus, for, see as much as you can. So whenever we're lighting, we always try to keep that in mind to get as much depth of field as we can. And the whip pans have become kind of a trademark with him, where I might be on one actor, and then I whip pan over to the next one, and then back to the first actor, and that's been kind of a constant as well. So those kind of roughly our visual elements.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else, but that's something that's always been with us.
Yeah, I was sort of curious on Bottle Rocket. That was sort of, I guess, the only one of his films, I guess up until Moonrise Kingdom, that was only in 1:8:5 aspect ratio.
Yes.
Did he ever intend to shoot Bottle Rocket in 2:3:5?
Yes, we wanted to shoot 2:3:5, and because it was Wes's first film, the studio and the powers that be were questioning whether we wanted to shoot anamorphic because it's a little more complicated, it requires a little more lighting. And so they asked us to do a test in pre-production where we shot a scene in both anamorphic and 1:8:5. So, of course, Wes and I totally loaded it towards the anamorphic. We made the frames very kind of artsy, and I lit them a little more beautifully. And then when we did the 1:8:5 scene, we purposely kind of made the frames less interesting, and I made the lighting a little more boring. And we sent the test off to the studio, and the studio said, we can't see the difference, you have to shoot 1:8:5. So we were kind of forced into that, which is not what we wanted to do. And when Wes did Rushmore, he made it clear up front that we were going to shoot anamorphic, and up until Moonrise Kingdom, everything was shot anamorphic.
Yeah, it's interesting just seeing in the 2:3:5 aspect ratio for, whether it be Rushmore, Royal Tannenbaums, Life Aquatic, or even Darjeeling, just the way the actors are staged within the frame, it just feels so specific. Does Wes really have a specific idea going into the day how he wants to stage the actors and how he wants to compose the frame?
Yes, generally we show up in the morning with a very specific idea of what we're going to be shooting. It all starts in a preparation. Wes and myself and the production designer go to all of our locations, or if they're building sets, and we talk pretty specifically how we want to shoot. And even starting on Moonrise Kingdom, we would sometimes even do what we did call pre-shoots, where we would have a camera and we would line up, production assistants or whoever happened to be with us, producers, and they would take the roles of different actors, and we would actually shoot them and just see how it looked on film. But then after we visited all these locations, Wes used to do very complete storyboards. Now, last two movies, he makes what we call an animatic, which is kind of a crude cartoon with hand-drawn figures, and it kind of Wes does all the voices of all the characters, and it is a pretty good blueprint for where the camera's going to be and how it's going to move and where the actors will be in the frame. So it's almost the entire film is contained in this animatic, and so it's something that we've kind of worked out beforehand quite carefully, and that's posted, and anybody on the crew or the cast is able to look at the animatic, and you have a very kind of specific idea what you're going to be shooting that day. So to answer your question, yeah, the blocking is fairly worked out beforehand, and I mean, obviously you get into a physical space like a train or which is a very small space to deal with, and you find that maybe you couldn't do exactly what we had planned, so there's a certain amount of visual improvisation that has to take place there. But I would say most of the films are very, very carefully pre-planned, for sure.
Yeah. I was wondering, too, as far as your work as a cinematographer and creating a color scheme and lighting a set, as far as working with a production designer or a wardrobe person, how much do you collaborate with them in terms of sort of identifying what will photograph well or what may not work within the confines of the film?
Well, in Wes movie, we have very close collaboration with both the production designer and the costume designer. Our last couple movies, Adam Stockhausen was our production designer, and Melina Cananel, we've worked with on and off over the years. And, Wes will work with them independently and talk about colors and things, and I usually tag along just to see what they're thinking. And, when you shoot film, obviously, sometimes things photograph differently than what it might appear to your eye. So we shoot, a lot of tests in pre-production. I mean, for instance, like a dark blue blazer will photograph almost black, or purple is kind of tricky. It photographs differently, darker than you would imagine. And so I'm always pushing the wardrobe people to lighten those colors up a little bit, because I know they'll be happier with the effect on film. And sometimes when you see someone in that wardrobe, it looks a little brighter, a little different than what they're going for, but you have to trust, because we shoot the test, that in the end it'll photograph properly. So what we end up doing, particularly on, say, Grand Budapest, Adam would have the art department paint like 4x8 sheets of foam core, different colors of pink that, like, we were experimenting for the interior of the hotel. And then Melina would have different pieces of cloth that we would just drape over someone's shoulder, and different shades of a color for the jackets, and we would kind of simulate how we would be lighting it during the movie, and then shoot different, put different colors up against each other just to see how they would photograph, and based on that, we all watch the tests, and we decide what we think is going to look the best, and obviously in the end Wes makes the call what he wants. So it's a very kind of elaborate testing process that we go through in pre-production.
Yeah. I was wondering too about Grand Budapest Hotel. It's probably the only movie I can think of that actually jumps from 3 different aspect ratios. I believe the movie opens in 1:8:5, then you go into 2:3:5, and then it goes for most of the film into, I believe, Academy ratio.
Yes.
So what was sort of the conception behind doing that, and also did you find it difficult at all in terms of transitioning from one aspect ratio to another throughout the making of the film?
Well, the idea of the different aspect ratios was Wes's, and he presented to me, and I at first was a little nervous and skeptical about it, but we did some tests again in pre-production, and I saw that it would work beautifully, and the concept was that each aspect ratio would reflect how movies were shot during that time period. The Academy was how films in the 30s were shot, and then in the 60s, a lot of studios were shooting the widescreen kind of as an answer to the advent of television. And then gradually we kind of settled into a 1:5, which has been from the 80s up until now kind of a standard format that people use. And so I think the concept was that each format would not only represent that time period, but because they are so different, they offer many different types of compositional possibilities. And so we studied a lot of films from the 30s, Ernst Lubitsch's comedies and Grand Hotel, and just to see how the directors and cinematographers of the time dealt with that square frame, and it just was an interesting study for me. At first, I was a little, afraid of that frame, but as we started using it, I just embraced it, and I grew to really love it, and it's a whole different way of working with space than what I had done in the past, and how to fit characters into a shot, and close-ups are a different deal than they would be with anamorphic or 1:5. So much of my work has been 1:5 and anamorphic. The Academy ratio was a real exciting new adventure for us, and we both really embraced it.
And Grand Budapest was shot all on film, is that correct?
Yes, it was. Everything was filmed. Some of the miniatures and stop motion was shot digitally, but all the live action was shot on 35 film.
Wow. I was wondering too, is it true that you also operate the camera?
Yes,
as well?
I operate for all Wes's movies. Yep.
Do you operate usually on every film that you work on, or is it usually?
Most of the movies I operate. Sometimes I do some big studio comedies where there's more than one camera, and I operate sometimes. Sometimes it's just better for me to be by a monitor, or if there's two cameras rolling, where I can kind of watch both cameras and make suggestions. But typically, I actually love operating. It's a lot of fun for me, and I feel like I'm much closer to what's going on, and I'm more of a part of it. And so I prefer to operate, but it is a little more difficult. And when you have multiple cameras, it's sometimes easier just to step back and let somebody else do it.
Yeah. I was wondering, just in terms of your general work as a cinematographer, how important lens choice is when you're going in to shoot a scene, and how much of that sometimes is talked over with the director, or is maybe just sort of your own independent choice as far as what you think would be the best lens to work with?
It varies. Lens choice kind of varies depending on who I'm working with. With Wes, he's very specific, and we have a director's finder that we actually put the lenses on, and he will always have that. And when we first get to the location and be looking through that and getting ideas, and I'll make certain suggestions, but we kind of he has a very specific idea of what he wants things to look like, so he's very involved in lens choice. Other directors are much looser about that sort of thing, and they, more interested in their actors and the performances of the actors, and so they will rehearse, and then they might say, what are you thinking? And I can throw some ideas at them, and they can say yes, or, well, maybe I was thinking this, and so it's a little looser kind of situation. And so much of it is kind of the feeling after you've shot for as long as I have. You kind of, you just kind of go with your gut instinct. What would be the best lens to use in this situation? And so I often just kind of go with my own instincts in that type of situation with a director. But it varies from director to director. Someone like Wes is very involved with lens choice, and other directors are, hardly involved at all. So it runs the gamut in between as well.
Yeah. In terms of working with many directors, like you've worked with William Friedkin, Gus Van Sant, Paul Feig, and you described Wes's process as really being so specific as far as what shots he wants, what lenses he wants to use, the framing of the scene, the staging of the actors. When you're working with someone who is sort of more sort of thinking through on the set, on the day, and just making those choices on the day, do you find that more difficult, or do you just kind of adjust to whatever the director's process is?
It can be more difficult, particularly when the blocking gets to be complicated. When you have a lot of different actors and they're moving around quite a bit, you have to kind of think very quickly how to cover it. I mean, there's always a time pressure. You have a day to do a scene or a few hours, whatever that it is on the schedule, and you're expected to get that work done during that day. And if we don't, and you have too many days like that, then the studio gets upset, and all kinds of crazy stuff happens. So, it's more difficult sometimes just to do it on the fly, but it also allows for a little more possibilities, of how to shoot something, and so it, in some ways it's a little more creatively freeing. But that said, I mean, Wes's movies are so well thought out beforehand, and every shot is very carefully thought out, and he's kind of edited this in his head so that it allows us to be more streamlined, I think, and to kind of be much more quick in shooting, because when we show up, we know exactly what's going to happen, and there's no surprises, and all of a sudden we're not looking in a direction that we had no intention of looking in, and so it allows him more time with his actors, and it allows us to move much faster. And luckily, I think Wes has great ideas, and so if he was a director who had really bad ideas, I'd be very unhappy, and would be balking at a lot of these shots. But we think a lot alike visually, and so I think that when he presents an idea, I rarely say, "Oh, that's a bad idea." I mean, usually I say that's a great idea. So I just try to enhance it as best I can.
Yeah. One of the interesting aspects about Wes Anderson's films, as you mentioned before, is his use of wide-angle lenses, and also a very large depth of field to get so much in focus.
Yeah.
I always wondered, do you need a lot of light to sort of pound on the set in order to get so much in focus and have such a large depth of field?
Yes, and particularly the anamorphic lenses, which inherently have less depth of field, we would bring bigger lights in to just get a little more punch and a little more depth of field happening there. So to answer your question, yes. I mean, in Grand Budapest, we had a situation where we created the hotel lobby in the 60s, and Adam Stockhausen put in a kind of a fake fluorescent type ceiling, but there were no lights up there. So we pounded that. We covered it with some tracing paper and just pounded it with a tremendous amount of light from above, because I knew we were shooting anamorphic, and we were shooting a slower film stock, which is less sensitive to light, and I knew that at some point Wes was going to want to use the zoom lens, which in anamorphic, when you shoot with the zoom lenses, you have to have a lot of light in order to make them function, on a very high level. So knowing all that, I prepared that set so that we could quickly put on the zoom and shoot without a giant relight situation. So we did use a lot of light in that particular set.
Yeah, I was wondering too, because you've used film so much throughout your career. What has been your experience with digital cameras, and how do you find the difference between lighting for film versus lighting for digital?
the whole digital camera first came on the scene, I fought it very hard. I was a film person. I came from film. I love film. I love the look of film. I love the process of shooting film. But over the past few years, the digital cameras have certainly come a long way, and now it's becoming harder and harder to shoot film. The studios don't want to shoot it. It's a little more expensive. If there's no lab, the labs are all closing down. So, if you're not in a place where there's a lab, they have to ship the film, and the whole process is slower. It's getting almost impossible to shoot film these days, really. So I have shot a lot of digital. I shoot the Alexa, which is a great camera, and I shot tons of commercials with the Alexa. And my last feature, which I shot in Budapest, called Spy, it hasn't been released yet. We ended up shooting the Alexa. I find that it's a different process, in some ways slower, because of all the cables and all the electronic stuff that accompanies the cameras. You can't just take a camera and put it on a tripod and start shooting right away. But it has certain advantages, one of them being in low light, particularly if you're on the streets at night, or you're in a situation where, in Spy, we were shooting in these tunnels below a brewery in Budapest, and there was almost no light down there, but the cameras really perform really wonderfully in those situations, and I think in many ways could outperform film. It has a different look to it, but that said, in today's world, we can manipulate the image in post-production so that it's getting more and more difficult to, tell the difference between film and HD. I mean, but it still does exist, and but every year the digital cameras just get better and better, and it's here to stay. And my fear is that before long, the film won't even be an option, and it's fast heading in that direction, which I personally am saddened and alarmed by. But that said, the digital cameras are getting better and better, and they've gotten to a point where, I don't know what the percentages are, but it seems like most movies are shot digitally today.
Yeah, I think the only movies I can think of over the past year, probably Grand Budapest Hotel, then Inherent Vice, and possibly Interstellar for Christopher Nolan.
Interstellar, yeah.
Yeah.
And you need, in all those situations, you need a very recognized and strong director to say, I want to shoot film, because otherwise the studios are just going to say, no, you can't do it, and the people that put up the money. So it's a sad state, but it's true. And all those directors, and Quentin Tarantino, they're all very kind of committed to film, and I'm so happy that still exists. But it's just getting harder and harder. And as I said, when I shot Spy digitally, it was not my first choice when I really wanted to shoot film for that particular movie. And but having shot it on the digital camera, we got some really beautiful things with it, and so it's just another tool. But they just, as I said, I don't keep repeating myself, but they just keep getting better and better and better every year. So
what's interesting too is that I think most of the film projectors in movie theaters around the world are also disappearing. Which
they're getting rid of film projectors, and I have mixed feelings about that. Obviously, there's nothing like experiencing seeing a film projected in film. There's a revival theater here in Santa Monica, the Arrow Theater, that shows film, and I took my whole family a couple of years ago to see Singing in the Rain, and or if you see a 70 millimeter print of Lawrence of Arabia. The experience of that is, you can't compare that to anything. The good news with the digital projection is it's pretty standardized, and so the people in a little theater in Arkansas are going to hopefully see the same image quality that we're seeing here in Los Angeles. And, the prints don't get beat up. It's in focus. You don't have a lot of the projection issues that we've been plagued by for so many years. So, I'm not against digital projection in many ways. It's a good thing for that reason. 'Cause there's nothing worse than going to your film and seeing it frame wrong or out of focus, or there's just the print is really dirty. I mean, that was always very disheartening for all filmmakers. So,
Yeah.
I think we've eliminated that problem with digital projection.
I was wondering, as far as the Grand Budapest Hotel, to wrap everything up, if there's a particular shot or a particular scene that you feel that you're the most proud of that was really executed even beyond what your expectations were.
There's nothing really in particular. I mean, one scene that, comes to mind was the scene where Joplin, Willem Dafoe character, chases Kovacs, the Jeff Goldblum character, through the museum, because that was kind of cobbled together from many different locations. Some being an actual museum in Dresden that we shot the exteriors and some of the interiors there. Others, in a little town that we were staying in, we had this kind of older buildings we would find that we would create different rooms of that art museum, and we used some front projection, which is a very old style of filming that people don't use too much anymore, but Wes was very taken by this whole quality of the image when you use the front projection. So we combine all kinds of different locations and techniques to kind of create the one cohesive whole of that museum. So it was an interesting exercise for us, and I was very happy with the sequence the way it was kind of came together. But it really is a variety of many different places and techniques.
Yeah, and then just to wrap everything up as well, I was wondering how you feel about receiving this Oscar nomination. I believe it's the first one of your career, and all the accolades the film has gotten. How do you see that, and are you very proud of the film?
Yeah, I mean, it was a surprise, and I was it's a huge honor, and if you look at the other films that are nominated, I mean, you've got Birdman with Emmanuel Lubezki and Roger Deakins and Ida, which was a beautiful Polish film, and then Mr. Turner, which is also incredibly beautiful, Dick Pope. But so it's an honor to be kind of put in a class with these other amazing cinematographers, and what I liked about them was they were all a little more classical in their photography. So often in today's world, a lot of the movies are manipulated so heavily in post-production that it's really difficult to really distinguish who did what kind of a situation. And I think in all these movies, still, I mean, in today's world, the reality is a lot is manipulated in post-production, but I think they were much more pure in their approach to cinematography, and as a cinematographer, I really appreciate that, and I can see what these guys were doing, and each film is unique and exquisite in its own way, so I was very honored and proud, and obviously if you're nominated for an award, you'd love to win, but for me, just getting the nomination was a huge honor, and I couldn't have been more happy.